here tonight. I'm really delighted to return to Keystone. So tonight, I was just joking, but it's actually very true. So this is the second time I've given this talk, okay? So I created this talk just for a Zoom talk, right? Just for a virtual online talk, because most places now, I'm not going in person, right? We're doing it online. So this was like wonderful. I thought you were kidding when you said we'll do it outside in the tent. I was like, no, I mean it.
Waiting for me.
Made my day. This makes my day. Makes my day. So this is the second time though. So as I said, you know, if you like, this will be good for me to get feedback. If you like this, the way this goes, and you like it, please, by all means, tell me. If you don't, you can keep it to yourself. Okay? Yeah, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So, new normal, New England road trip, right? So, just what it sounds like. I was thinking a couple of months ago, because I wasn't going anywhere, to give talks in person, which I love to do. Sometimes I do it 2 or 3 nights a week. I love to do it. I love to share the stories of New England with people who love to hear them, right? But I couldn't do it. Couldn't go anywhere. So I was thinking of a way to adapt some stories that have not been in my books, completely separate, other stories, that I thought would lend themselves to just this, to just talking with some pictures about a road trip, because nobody's really traveling right now, right? I'm not, you're not. Most people are not traveling. So I thought this is a way to sort of give ourselves a little road trip around the area we love, New England, right? Without actually having to get in a car. Now imagine that you don't have a mask on, keep them on, but I'm over here. That's why I took mine off. I took the liberty way over here so you could hear me, right? So the new normal, which is what we're living in, a road trip, right? No mask or gas, it's not gonna cost you. You don't have to get in a car and go anywhere, right? So what do you think of? What do you think of when you think of New England? By that, I mean, I call them the main dishes, geographically, right? What comes to mind?
Oh,
Seafood. Got that covered. Got that covered. We'll get there. But I always say, certainly the ocean, we're right here, right? We're right here, right? This is Portland Head, but we could be talking about Nobska, right? Race Point, right? We're right on the ocean here in the Cape, right? So you think of the ocean, that's certainly one of the main dishes geographically of New England. The mountains, right? Think of the mountains, the greens in Vermont, the whites in New Hampshire, right? The Berkshires in western Massachusetts. We're visiting them all in the next 40 minutes, okay? So you certainly think of the mountains. And I always say that history may not be one of the geographic main dishes, but it's a pretty main dish when it comes to New England, right?
yes, right.
History. People always say, oh, very famous for, you know, the red barns all through Vermont and the low stone walls all over everywhere in New England. That's history, right? That's history. Here's the old State House. What street is the old State House on?
State Street.
That's like who's buried in Grants too, right? You know how many people? No kidding. True story. So I was doing a story once about the history of Fenway Park. And I gave a quiz to people walking around outside the park. True as I'm standing here, said to a woman, what color is the green monster? For 5 minutes, she's, oh God, I know this. I know. Right, so the old State House is on State Street. It's still there. So I always say that the main dishes, when you're talking about the main dishes of New England, there's a lot of great sides, right? A lot of great side dishes. Politics, who knows who that guy is on the left?
Curly.
Curly, very good, very good. Who knows who number 6 is in the middle?
Oh, he's a basketball player.
He is very good. You're halfway there. He was on the great teams with Cousy, Havlicek, Red Auerbach, Bill Russell.
There you go.
Very good. Bill Russell. And who said seafood? Who
did.
said, there you go. There's your seafood, right? Now, that's lobster. But you know, my favorite places to eat in New England are diners. How many of you like diners?
I like that.
How many of you have a favorite diner?
We do.
You do.
Dave.
Dave's in Middleborough. Absolutely, absolutely. So at the end, we're gonna do a little bonus dessert dish at the end, and I'm gonna give you a little speed tour of my favorite diners through the states that we're gonna visit tonight. So we're gonna start off. Here's our compass headings. We're gonna start off using Boston as our home base, right? Jumping off point. We're gonna go north. Then we're going to keep going north, right, down east to Maine. Then we're going to bang a left, and we're going to go west into New Hampshire, and further west to Vermont, then south back toward Massachusetts, and east again from the Berkshires on back into Boston. So, you ready?
Yeah.
You ready?
All set.
All right, let's go. So, first stop, the North Shore. Now, down this way, of course, we are well south of Boston, having even gone past the South Shore all the way to the Cape. The North Shore, however, is home to me. I grew up in Winthrop, or as I like to refer to it, the charming little seaside town at the end of runway 27L.
Right.
Okay? It was a very noisy childhood. How many of you have ever been to Winthrop?
Yeah.
Some? Yeah. You know, Winthrop is one of those
I've been
places,
right there.
it's a peninsula, right? So if you don't have reason to be in Winthrop, then you don't go
Don't
through
go
it,
there.
right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
you don't go through there. Now, I grew up in fact, when I was growing up, that was not there. That was a Nike missile installation, believe it or not. It was Fort Heath, and the missiles were decommissioned when I was about 6, 7 years old. But I grew up right there, where those were built. Now, as you can see, right, see there's my house. No, I'm kidding, but that's pretty much where it was. You can see I pointed out the plane for you, because when I was growing up, they were noisier. You know, now they're quieter. When I was growing up, they were every 18 seconds, and they were loud. So, funny thing, two places I can think of, both in school and playing baseball, right here at Point Shirley, right on the flight path of 27L. So, if a plane was heavy coming in, right, and landing on 27, it was about 250 feet above your head if you were playing baseball here. I swore I used to be able to see people in the windows of the plane. And maybe I was imagining that. But both on the ball field and in school, it was just standard that a teacher would just simply pause for a moment because you couldn't be heard. So it has definitely gotten quieter. Funny story about the water tower. So they painted it red, white, and blue during the bicentennial year, 76. When I was in high school a couple years before that, Bud Light approached the town and asked them how much it would cost to turn that into a Bud Light beer can.
Oh my God.
Does that sound like a good idea in a town with a youth drinking problem? No. Thank God it was one time they turned down an easy buck and painted it red, white, and blue instead. But you can see, there's the airport, right? Here's the town. You could never, ever build an airport now that close. It's literally an eighth of a mile between the end of that runway and the town, right? So, enough where I grew up. We're going to go further north now to my other favorite cape. You know, there's two capes in Massachusetts, right? You know, the funny thing is that Cape Cod is such shorthand for the Cape that, in fact, that's all people say, right? You say, I'm going to the Cape for the weekend. Nobody thinks you mean you're going to Cape Ann for the weekend, right? It only means Cape Cod. But there are two capes. There are two capes. Now, I love Cape Cod. I've been coming to Cape Cod since I was, you know, a toddler. But Cape Ann has a very special appeal to it. Granted, there are far fewer mini golf courses per square mile, but there are also far fewer people. And it really, it's a fascinating place. You know, Cape Ann was an island until the 1950s. There were some smaller bridges, so technically it wasn't an island. But it wasn't until the Annisquam Bridge was built in the 1950s that Route 128 extended out on to Cape Ann and made it much more accessible. So it really is in some ways the other Cape. How's that for a mouthful for a bridge? The Abram Piatt Andrew Jr. Bridge. Yeah. No wonder people just call it the Andrew Bridge or the Annisquam Bridge, right? But it is a beautiful place. Mark Kanigis is a wonderful landscape photographer who lives in Rockport. Wonderful, longtime friend of mine, and has let me use a number of his photographs in my books. This is his picture of Gloucester Harbor. And there is Rockport, his hometown.
Yeah.
Who knows what that red building is?
I should remember.
You should remember.
I do. It's very famous.
It's not called Bill Russell.
That is good. People painted it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
People painted it. In fact, there are some people who say that that is the most photographed and most painted building in America. It's motif number 1. They call it motif number 1. Now, years back, and there it is, and it's on the cover. Was on the cover of my first book. You know, I got used to it. I'll tell you, inside story. So when you write a book and you have a publisher, you don't get to have any say about what kind of artwork they use or how they want to design the cover, for instance. So when I first saw this and they sent this to me, I thought it looked like a cookbook. It does a little bit look like a cookbook, right? But I got used to it. But that is motif number 1. Now, this is Gussie Contrino, who Mark Kanigis introduced me to years ago. Gussie is still lobstering in his late, almost 73 now, I think. Still lobstering. And off his boat, Gussie's Girls. Gussie has 4 daughters. And so years ago, I said to Gussie, we were in Rockport Harbor, and we were looking at motif number 1. And I was looking at, can everybody see that white building to the right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah? And I'm standing there looking at it, and I was like, I'm looking at it, I said, Gussie, what is that white building? I said, I've never even really noticed it. There's a white building right behind motif number 1. What is that? And Gussie said, motif number 2. Yeah, it took me a minute too. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Halibut Point, but Halibut Point is the place right, if you imagine Cape Ann, it is the place that is right where you turn around, right? So if you've driven out there and you've driven through Gloucester on Route 127, and then you would start coming west and south again and return to 128. Halibut Point, it was actually halibut, it's nothing to do with the fish. Halibut, believe it or not, comes from the term to haul about, because it is that point where if you were sailing, that's where you would haul about because the wind changes because you are at the point of land. So it actually comes from haul about point, but it is a beautiful place, and the lobster pool is there, which is one of my favorite places. Look, I'll eat lobster anywhere, but it is a gorgeous place, as you can see. And I've been taking my daughters up there since they were, in a little bucket thing, It's a beautiful place, and that's right at the end at Halibut Point. But we're talking about lobster, but on Cape Ann, it's not lobster that reigns supreme.
Yeah.
It is fried clams. It is fried clams. Anybody familiar with all the fried clam places up, right? So we're going to go through that quickly because there are so many. Well, first of all, it is said that the fried clam was invented in Ipswich, actually Essex, by, you've heard of Woodman's,
I know
right?
that.
Yeah. So here's Bessie Woodman, and her husband Chubby Woodman owned a clam place, and they sold clams. And the story goes that in 1916, so they had a big fryer going all the time because they chopped up potatoes and they would make basically, like potato chips, but they're bigger pieces, right? And so they had the fryer going, and Chubby was chopping up some clams to put in stew. And old fisherman, local guy, is sitting there, and he says to him, "Hey, Chub," he said, "why don't you toss one of those clams into the fryer, see what happens, see how that turns out." So Chubby threw a raw clam into the fryer, and they pulled it out, and it was like rubber. It was awful. It was like rubber. Bessie, proving the old rule that behind every successful man, there's an even smarter woman,
That's right.
right? She took the clam and ran it through the batter that they were using for the potatoes. Then she put it in. Then they took it out, and this guy was like, Oh my God, this is good! And the fried clam was born. And the fried clam was born. And today, as you may know, Route 133, which other than 128 is the main road, all around Cape Ann.
Isn't that in Woodman's in Ipswich?
Essex.
Or
Essex,
I mean.
just
Essex,
like,
right.
just like, except for the clam box. Now the clam box is in Ipswich.
Yeah.
The clam box is in Ipswich, but Woodman's and Farnham's are both right next door to each other in Essex. And so it has become what they call the clam wars now in Cape Ann, which is kind of funny. All right, so now we're moving on. We're moving on, and we're going to continue moving further north. But you know, if you go further north toward Maine in New England, you are doing what?
Down east.
Bingo. Bingo. You have to start letting other people go. I'm going to make you raise your hand.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I travel a lot.
I'm kidding. So yes, you would go down east toward Maine, of course, where the mountains meet the sea. And I'm going to tell you my two favorite factoids about Maine. Okay, these are my two favorite facts about Maine. I love Maine, but my two favorite facts are: one, Maine is the only state in America that borders only one other state. The only one. I think if Maine had its way, it wouldn't border any other state. But that's Mainers for you. But then, of course, that would make Maine Hawaii, so that wouldn't really work. But my other favorite factoid is even harder to believe, right? Because you can't see it like you can see that it borders only one other state. So think about the ragged and rocky coast of Maine, as they say, right? Think about it if you're threading your way down east. You get into Maine at Kittery or wherever, right, southern Maine, and you're working your way up down east, okay?
Yeah.
And you're threading your way through. Look at that. Look at all those little finger peninsulas sticking out into the ocean, the Gulf of Maine. All those little finger
Lobster
peninsulas,
places.
all those little islands, right? And you're working your way all the way. By the time you get to Rockland, halfway, you've already gone 400 miles, and you have 400 more to go. So it is a huge, huge coastline, made even more huge because what you're not really seeing is how much is taken up with going in and out of all. Do you know what you get if you fly from Boston to, let's say, Machias, Eastport, right? If you flew from Boston, about 375 nautical miles, take you about 25, 35 minutes, okay? If you were able to stretch out that coast of Maine into one single line, right, like a piece of yarn that's all balled up, if you were able to stretch it out into a single line, you know what you get? 3,000 miles. That will take you from Boston to LA. That's the coast of Maine. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? So, anybody know where this is? You are welcome to. Come on, you're my stop. Where?
Kennebunkport?
Not Kennebunkport. No,
Oh.
no. It's a tough one. This is a toughie.
It's pardon me?
It's
This is a hard one. You know why it's a hard one?
Wells Beach.
Nope. Nope. Further north. You know why it's a toughie? Because I'm going to move that cursor because there's no
Not
reason why there should be an
important.
arrow pointing out.
Is it important? No.
It is not. So, let me
I
just
should know
fix
it
that.
is, 'cause I remember seeing
There. So part of the reason that this is hard to peg is that lighthouse is a very familiar design. It looks like a lot of other lighthouses, right? It looks, it's shorter than some. It's about the same size of Knobska, only what, maybe 25 miles from here in Falmouth. It looks like a shorter version by about 45, 50 feet of Boston Light, right? It looks like the Nubble, also in Maine. Very familiar, very economical, very cheap design. So that many of them were built like this in the 19th century. But this one is in mid-coast Maine. So you would go up to, say, Wiscasset, Brunswick,
Okay.
all right, mid-coast. You'd be facing Muscongas Bay.
Oh.
Now you know. I'd never heard of Muscongas. I know Maine, and I didn't know Muscongas Bay until I got more familiar with the lighthouse. But this is Pemaquid Point. Pemaquid Point is at the end of one of those finger peninsulas, narrow finger peninsulas that we were talking about. You go up to Mid-Coast Maine and you get to Brunswick, where Bowdoin College is, right? And you take a right turn and you head south for about 21 miles and you get to Bristol and you would arrive on the other side of the lighthouse. But if you go down past the lighthouse, this is what you see. Is that stunning? Is that stunning? Is that stunning or what? I love Pemaquid Point. I've been to Pemaquid Point in all 4 seasons of the year, all times of day, and it has these amazing, this whole field of striated rock, you know, that runs right down to the water, and it's just, to me, it's just beautiful. Now, who likes chowder? Who doesn't like chowder in New England, right? So I'm going to tell you something.
It's chowder.
Chowder.
It's
Chowder. Right, chowder. I'm going to tell you something. So I love chowder. And in my travels around New England, so I've traveled all around New England, everywhere, for over 20 years. And because I love chowder, a little side part of my traveling is that for me, it's been like a holy grail to find the best chowder in New England. Now, mind you, I didn't care if I ever found the best, as long as I get to keep trying it, right? I don't care if there's a winner, but I found the winner. I found the winner. I found the best chowder in New England. Little place that I had never heard of, Buttermilk Cove, which is in Brunswick, Maine, right? Buttermilk Cove. It's called the Gwinnett Trading Company, which wouldn't say anything to you about seafood, right? It sounds like they might sell like flannel shirts, you know? But it was a former used car lot, and my friends Julie and Brian Soper. So Julie's a former fisherwoman. Her husband Brian's a scalloper, still scalloping today, scallops year-round. Scallops in the middle of the winter in a wetsuit, dives. This guy's serious about scalloping, and he brings his scallops fresh. You can eat a fresh scallop at Gwinnett at 12:30 that was on the seabed 45 minutes before that. That's fresh, right? That's fresh. So Julie's a wonderful cook, and she also loves chowder. And she came up with her own recipe for clam chowder, and I'm telling you, it is the best chowder I have ever tasted. Right there, does that look good or what, right? Yeah, that looks good. All right, we're done in Maine. Now, remember I said we're going to head west out of Maine, right? Okay, so we're on the next leg of our big loop here, and now we're heading into the mountains. Where do you think this is?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. New Hampshire. You know your geography, right? Into the mountains. I thought, what the heck? We might as well start at the top, right? Because Mount Washington, exactly. Mount Washington is not only the tallest mountain in New Hampshire, not only the tallest mountain in New England, it's the tallest mountain west of the Mississippi River, right? So it is tall.
East of
I don't know what east. What did I say? West?
That's all right.
That wouldn't exactly work, would it? Thank you for catching that. I kept, I was looking for a picture of me in Mount Washington about 2 weeks ago, and I found this. And I was looking at this, and I was like, I don't know why. It was about 12 below. We were just south of the summit, and I don't know why I don't have. I must have been just jumping out to get that picture. But anyway, Mount Washington. I've hiked Mount Washington. I've skied Mount Washington in Tuckerman's Ravine on Memorial Day when it was almost 70 degrees when I started up from Pinkham's Notch. Front came through that afternoon. Classic Mount Washington, right? Front came through. It was 41 degrees when I was halfway down. Yeah. Crazy weather on Mount Washington. Now, here is a genuinely funny story, but it wasn't funny to my photographer. How many of you have ever driven up the auto road? Yep. So the auto road was built in 1861, and the last time I was on the auto road was with my longtime photographer, Carl Vieira. I miss Carl. Carl retired 2 years ago, and we shot together pretty much continuously for about 18 years. And so about 6 years ago, we were doing a piece up in the Mount Washington Valley, and it was a beautiful day, as you can see. The sun was out. We said, geez, we should drive up the auto road and get some pictures on the summit. So we did. So we're heading up the auto road. About halfway up, as we got higher in altitude, I noticed that Carl was getting very fidgety. And he was clearly something was bothering him. And I said, "What's up? You okay?" And he couldn't even express. I said, "What is going on with you?" And he said, "Look, I got to tell you something. I have a phobia that you don't know about." I said, "What's your phobia?"
Heights.
No, it wasn't height, because he and I have been up in helicopters, hang gliders, tall buildings. It wasn't height. It was very specific. And it had just never come up because we'd never been on a road like that together. Whatever it was, we had just never quite been in that situation. He had a phobia about being on a road with no guardrail where there's a steep drop-off. This is a guy who's been up in tiny airplanes, helicopters, the masts of ship. None of that bothered him. He just had this very specific, and he wasn't kidding. So the rest of the way up, he had my jacket over his head so that he couldn't see. Poor Carl. But you can see he was all smiles until we had to drive back down. He was all smiles. So another mountain here. We're going to visit a mountain now that, sad story, no laughing matter at all. Sad story. Talk about missing somebody. This is, I mean, everybody said, you think of New Hampshire and you think of Lake Winnipesaukee, right? The biggest lake. This is Profile Lake. And I think Profile Lake is in some ways the most beautiful lake in New Hampshire of all, because it's in, I think, the most beautiful place in all of New Hampshire. Franconia Notch. Right? What's that?
Did Kyle take the picture before this one?
No, he didn't take this one.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. No, he didn't. He could have. I mean, he's certainly good enough, but he didn't. But I think Franconia Notch is
Pretty, very pretty.
unbelievable. Now, this is Route 93, wending its way through Franconia Notch. How many of you remember when you are just about here, you can't really see it from there, but if you are wending your way on 93, what is it you would invariably, if you're heading north on Route 93, what is it you would crane your head to look at as you drove by?
Yeah.
The old man in the mountain, right? The old man in the mountain. New Hampshire's most famous landmark. It was. New Hampshire's most famous landmark. On its license plate, on its everything, had to do with the old man. And you know that, there it is, all through history, the iconic symbol of New Hampshire. And you know, on a very sad day, well, before we get to that, this is something I didn't fully appreciate until the old man was gone, right? I did not fully appreciate, I don't know how many of you know this, but I did not fully appreciate this until, whatever, how long has it been now? 10, 12, 15 years ago, over 15 years ago. I did not know, because you can't see it from the ground, and you can't go up there and see it. But the old man, what made up the profile was actually 5 separate ledges of rocks. And it was like a Rubik's Cube. As you're driving, remember, you had to wait for there it is, right? You had to wait, because what was happening was, as you were moving, those rock faces, those 5 faces, were all aligning to form that image, right? So it doesn't look like that if you're up there. It doesn't even look like that if you're, if you were just here instead of here. It doesn't look like that. It would just look like rocks. So there are all these different rock outcroppings that come together at just the right angle to give you that. And because they were 5 different rock faces, over the centuries and millennia, they have gradually degraded, right? Every winter, every ice storm, every snow, every cold to warm to cold degrades the rock. Rocks fall all the time in the mountains, all the time, right? But these rocks hadn't fallen. These rocks hadn't fallen. Part of the reason they had not fallen was because of this, which you couldn't see from the ground. That every year these crews were up there, volunteers. Nobody was paid. Well, this guy was eventually paid by the state. That family was really responsible for it. Actually, that's his dad was the guy who was eventually paid by the state. But the point was, these people were constantly trying to preserve the old man. They ran cabling, big, huge turnbuckles and massive cables. They would go up and get rid of the ice because they knew this was going to come down someday. And they were just trying to preserve it as long as they could, and they did, as long as they could, until May 3rd, 2003. And then it came down. It came down because of a really perfect storm. And I mean, I use that term advisedly, actually. It really was. It would have happened eventually, but it was kind of the perfect storm, because what happened was, it was a very cold spring. And in late April, a front came through that lasted for about a week, and it was extreme. It got very warm. It got, this weird jet stream came through, and the temperature shot up to almost 70 degrees for 3 days. Another Canadian air mass came through, temperature dropped to almost freezing. Then it dropped below freezing for 3 straight days. So all that water turned to ice. And you know, ice expands. And sometime, probably about 1 or 2 in the morning, on May 3rd, 2003, the old man came down. And that was it. And that was it. Another sort of one of my favorite old men of the mountains, Dick Hamilton, longtime friend. Dick knew more about the old man than anybody. Dick was responsible for tourism in the White Mountains. And he worked in Woodstock, New Hampshire. And every night, he would drive up 93 back to his house in Littleton. And he told me once, he said, you know, I know who's responsible for my job. It's that guy up on the mountain. And so he said every night, driving home to Littleton, he would roll down his window, and he'd look up, and he'd say, good night, old man. And he'd salute Dick Hamilton. May he rest in peace. So the question was how to commemorate. You know, in 2003, in the wake of the old man coming down, there were people who actually said, well, why don't we just build a replica? I don't think that would have been a good idea, right? But there were all kinds. So Ron Magers is a wonderful toy designer in Newburyport, and Ron came up with this most ingeniously simple way of commemorating the old man. He came up with these profilers. And remember I said, you know, that the old man is made up of these 5 rock facings? So that's what these are. These profilers have the exact same, in miniature, the rock facings that form the old man. And what you do is, you go and you stand behind one of these, and just like you're in your car, right? But you move. You move until you come up with the perfect, look at that. Isn't that amazing? Wow. And for just a minute, right, it's like the old man is there again. Just ingenious. Ingenious. Wow. Ingenious. Now, there is still one profile left, right across from where the old man was, and this is the Watcher, who some say looks somewhat like a woman or a man or maybe a Native American chief with a headdress, right? The Watcher. But you can't see it from the ground. You can only see this from a height up Mount Pemigewasset, so not a lot of people get to see that. As long as we're in New Hampshire, how many of you have ever been along Antique Alley? Antique Alley, yeah. So Antique Alley runs for about 21 miles near Durham, where UNH is, right? And it runs about 21 miles kind of northwest to the traffic circle at Epsom. And, of course, it is awash with antique places. Charlie Yetton, who runs the Betty House in Northwood, New Hampshire, one of my favorites. Charlie, you know, he looks around and says, you know, everybody's got everything. But he said, I focus just on 2 things. Old chairs and old campaign posters. That's a niche market, right? If you want an old chair or an antique campaign poster, Charlie's your guy. Now, I don't know if any of you ever heard of Rebecca Rule, but Becky Rule, I think, is the funniest woman in New England. And she lives at one end of Antique Alley. In fact, she's a neighbor of Charlie's in Northwood. And Becky Rule has written a lot of books. She's written, these are just a few, but among her most famous ones, I love this one. Isn't that a great title? You know the famous New Hampshire license plate, right. Live Free or Die? Right. Hers is Live Free and Eat Pie. That's a little more uplifting, right? Yeah. Nobody's dying, right? Let's just eat pie. So years ago, she wrote a book called Heading for the Rhubarb, which is in itself is an old New England expression. But in it, she talks about how difficult it is to be seen as a native in New England, right?
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, people, they take that very seriously. I remember one time I was at Moody's Diner, which we're going to visit in a minute, in Waldoboro, Maine. And I wanted to talk to somebody who'd grown up in Waldoboro, right? And I sat down next to this guy, and this guy was legitimately an older guy. As you know, he was 93. And I said, so you look, I said, did you grow up here? You native? He said, no, sir. I said, no? No, sir. I said, you're not a native of Waldeboro? No, sir. I said, well, when did you move here? I was about 6 months old, and he still did not consider himself a native. See? Right? So I said to Becky, when do you become if this guy doesn't consider himself a native, when do you become a native in New England? And here's her answer. When the last person who knows when you moved to town dies, you're a native. Right? You can't argue with that logic. All right. So we're going to move west now, further west into Vermont, the Green Mountain State, Mount Mansfield, one of my favorite places. I love to ski and snow. Now, you know, Mount Mansfield also has a famous profile, but a lot of people aren't familiar with it. It is said to look like an old man lying down looking up at the sky. Can you see that? I'm going to flip that for you. Tell me if you see it better now. Okay? Forehead, nose, chin. Not quite the same. It's not the old man. No, I always say it just makes you miss the old man even more, right? So, I love to ski. I've been skiing since I was a little kid. But just this past winter, less than a year ago, I found the most delightful place. Now, I've skied in the West, in the Rockies. I've skied pretty much everywhere in New England. But I'd never heard of this tiny little place. This makes it look bigger than it is, because it's really a little hill. But it is a wonderful place. And what makes it wonderful, Northeast Slopes and East Corinth, very, very retro. And by that, I mean, no one's making a dime. It's all run by the community. It's all volunteer, just so people and families have a place they can afford, because skiing's expensive, right? And so it's all volunteer. It goes back a long way. It has the oldest continuously running lift in North America. And as you can see, it's popular with kids. This is what kids in East Corinth and 5 surrounding towns do for their gym requirement, their phys ed requirement. They don't have to pay a dime. Local ski areas come together. They create this like lending library of skis. And the first day of the year, kids go off. They get fitted for skis and boots. They don't pay a dime. And they don't pay a dime at the hill. That is unheard of today. There's Wade Peterson. And I'll tell you what, how hard is it to believe? So I'm not kidding you. I've skied all over. I've skied at big, expensive places, which are not my favorites, but I've skied at them. Aspen, Stowe. You can easily spend, not $16, you can easily spend $10 on a soft drink. Right? $45 on a lunch of a sandwich, and right? Ridiculous money. So look at this. I spent $10 to ski, $6 for a delicious burger, $16. Unheard of. I can't wait to go back there. So we're already back in Massachusetts as we finish our run here back toward Boston. And now we're in the Berkshires, which of course, nothing like the whites or the greens, right? The Berkshires are more rolling hills than high mountains. Beautiful nonetheless. I always think, do you think of Stockbridge?
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of people think of Stockbridge when they think of the Berkshires. You know who this is?
Norman Rockwell.
Norman Rockwell. You know what this is?
That's the studio.
It's not motif number 2.
It's
Of 3. This is Norman Rockwell's studio on the grounds of what is now the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, and there is Norman Rockwell painting. Now, Norman Rockwell spent the last 20 years of his life living in Stockbridge. I've been in his house, what was his house. And the last 20 years of his life, a lot of people know Rockwell from his wonderful illustrations, in like Saturday Evening Post. Incredible illustrator. But what a lot of people don't know is that the last 20 years of his life, Rockwell devoted a lot of his talent and time to detailing some of America's social issues. And the issue that really interested Rockwell the most was the issue of race in America. And in 1967, this is a famous painting, integrating public schools in Arkansas, right? Some of those racist governors were refusing to allow young black school children to come to school. Makes my head explode now when I think about it. But it was reality, right? It was happening in the 1950s. And President Eisenhower sent in U.S. Marshals to escort these kids. And that's that painting, the problem we all live with. In 1967, Life magazine, remember Life? Life magazine commissioned Rockwell to create a painting for a special edition they were doing. And he created this painting called New Kids in the Neighborhood. Wonderful painting about families of color moving in this case Rockford, Illinois. And this was the cover of the special edition of Life magazine, right? Now, I want to draw your attention to this young gentleman. Young gentleman right here, right in the white sweatshirt, holding the glove. Take a good look. His name is Ray Gunn. He was 13 years old when he posed for Norman Rockwell. There weren't a lot of families of color at that time living in Stockbridge, but Ray Gunn's grandfather was friendly with Norman Rockwell, and when Rockwell must have told him he was going to be doing this project, he must have suggested my grandson, would be great, the model for you, and he did. He was 13 years old in 1967. He was no longer 13 when we visited with him in 2004. Wonderful guy. I asked Ray, I said, what do you think when you walk by that painting at the Norman Rockwell Museum? And he looked at it and he said, well, it's nice to say there's someplace in the world where I'll always be 13. Right? I'll always be 13. Now, I know, whoa, you're probably wondering, why am I looking at a Yankees hat? Right. Well, Jim Bouton is one of my favorite people. And believe it or not, this ex-Yankee became a Red Sox fan because he moved to Massachusetts. Jim Bouton, you may recall, was the author of Ball 4. Really the first major sports tell-all, in 1969, when Bouton was no longer, had the arm any longer, couldn't really pitch fast, so he became a knuckleball pitcher. And the expansion Seattle Pilots picked him up, and that year he kept a journal, and that became Ball 4. And years later, when he was retired, he moved out to the Berkshires, South Egremont, and I visited with him in that same trip. I met Ray Gunn in 2004, and it was wonderful. It was one of the most wonderful days of my life, because I revered him when I was growing up, and I pitched in Little League and Pony League, and he was known as Bulldog Bouton because when he pitched, he threw so hard, his cap would fall off. That was his trademark. So when I was pitching in Little League and Pony League, I tried to emulate him so much that when I released the ball, even if I had to shake my head to make my hat come up, I told him that, and he was just... So his wife told me while we were watching Jim throw balls to his dog, I said, so he's not a Yankees fan anymore? No. She said, now he's a Red Sox fan. But she said, funny story about the Yankees. When we moved here, she said, the first fall we moved here, he still was wearing his old Yankees hat. And she said, one day it was like October, and I'm outside, and I can hear in the distance, it's hunting season, so I can hear, the pop, pop every now and then, hunters. And I'm looking at Jim tossing balls that are going into the woods, and he's shagging them, and I said, honey, come here. And she said, I told him, I said, it's hunting season, you're wearing a Yankees hat in Massachusetts. And he said, yeah, he took the hat off. So we are heading back to Boston, right? We're heading east, we're heading home. Dessert, anybody?
Squash pie.
Quick lightning round of diners? Who's up for it? You up for it?
Yes.
All right, so my favorite diners in 3.5 minutes. So the first one, North Shore, the Agawam Diner in Raleigh. Anybody ever been?
No.
Anybody like banana cream pie?
Oh, yeah.
Best one ever. I mentioned Moody's Diner in Waldoboro, Maine, right? If you ever get your hands on this book, it is, I make meatloaf from that cookbook. My kids won't eat meatloaf anywhere else now, right? Comfort food, same at the Palace in Biddeford, Maine. These two guys, they were working in Portland, Maine. They wanted to open up their own restaurant. Of course, that takes a fortune now in Portland, Maine. So instead, they bought an old diner that was closed down in Biddeford, the Palace. Look at that cheeseburger. I don't know how you eat that thing, but it sure is good to look at, right? Sure is good to look at. In New Hampshire, for me, there's only one, the Red Arrow. Because I love politics, the Red Arrow is absolutely famous. Every politician who comes through New Hampshire in presidential primary season, you have to make a stop at the Red Arrow. And there is our 44th president, Barack Obama, making his way through the Red Arrow when he was campaigning in 2008. In Vermont, two of them. In West Brattleboro, the Chelsea Royal Diner, wonderful place. Chester, Vermont, also in southern Vermont, wonderful place. And of course, Worcester. You have to include Worcester because Worcester is where the diner was born. And the Boulevard Diner is in some ways one of my favorite diners because of the history it represents. You know, people will look at real diner fanatics will look at an old diner and they'll say, is it a classic Worcester dining car? Because that's where they were invented. And I always feel like that sign on Shrewsbury Street just looms up like a beacon in the night, and it makes you feel welcome. And as we head back to Boston, the lights of Fenway shining, right, guiding us home, and we are home. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.